Today we're continuing the series. We're facing opponents of different rating levels. The goal of this series is to help players of different levels to improve their chess by showing the types of mistakes which players at different rating levels make and how to punish them. So I'm a 2100 rated player and I'm going to be taking you through my thought process, and we're going to see the moves that my opponent plays, and the feeling is that there's going to be some difference. So if you're around the 600 level yourself, you're going to be able to bring your own way of thinking a bit closer to my way of thinking and improve your chess. So right now I'm playing an opening called the Scotch. This is with the immediate d4. Usually black captures in the center, and then I would capture back with the knight. What that does is it creates an imbalanced pawn structure. Now already my opponent has gone for something which is a bit unusual here. He's gone for this move d5, counter-striking in the center. Now this move is actually extremely unusual, and I'm not entirely sure what to do against it. So already I have to think here. It's funny, isn't it? Because you can study the moves that players normally make, and then you're just at a bit of a loss when they deviate as soon as on move 3. Now there's tension in the center, so it's important to get this moment right. So let's see. If I capture with the d-pawn, then, well, black can't capture back with the knight because I'm defending that one. But I would imagine that he would capture here, and then there's pressure against my knight, and there's also the possibility of the queen trade, which I don't really want to allow, not this early in the game. If I instead captured with the e-pawn, that would attack the black knight, which would then have to move, and it could capture the pawn on d4. In that line, I could capture on e5. I mean, another option here is to just leave the tension in the center. I could just develop with a move like knight to c3. But then after bishop to b4, the knight would be pinned. So it's actually a tricky move that my opponent has played here. Also capturing with the knight is possible. But then after he takes and I take back, again, he can take at the end there, and he's got this pawn on e4. Maybe that's actually a weak pawn, because then there'd be a queen trade, and again, I don't really want to allow that. I'm going to start by capturing this way. He could also capture back with the queen. This is possible. So queen takes, and I think one thing here which is important to highlight is my ability to develop now with tempo. So knight to c3 attacks the queen while also developing a piece from the starting square. This is a good way to improve your position with a gain of time. It's certainly something that players at more advanced levels are thinking about always. Like if you can develop in the opening while also attacking one of the enemy pieces, well then that's a good thing to do. Notice that the queen can't capture here because the knight's defending it. So instead, black goes over to a5. So with that move, the knight is now pinned, but that doesn't matter too much right now. I could capture here, in which case I would expect that my opponent could capture back. And then there's the opportunity to perhaps pin that knight. That looks quite interesting actually, because we've got this tension now where the center is opened up very early in the game. Another option is to advance the pawn up to d5. So by doing that, the knight has to move, and then I could capture on e5 next move. I'm going to go for this. Because this is a challenging move for my opponent to face. And I think that after the knight moves, I'm simply going to be able to win this pawn on e5. One thing about the opening that my opponent went for is that it gets very sharp very quickly, as you can see, with the centre opening up. But I think the problem with capturing here with the queen is that allowing me to develop with tempo like this means that I'm able to gain an extra developing move on top of the advantage that you already get at the start of the game with the white pieces. So d5. Let's see how my opponent reacts to this. He can't take the pawn because that's defended by the knight. I mean, the knight is pinned, but it wouldn't be pinned anymore if the queen were to capture. No, so he can't take the pawn. I mean, it's defended several ways. So here my opponent has missed the threat that I was making. The threat that I was making, of course, was to capture the knight. And this is a typical mistake that you could see at around the 600 ELO level. This is just a free knight, and I need to be careful. I need to make sure that there's no refutation to this, but what do we do to make sure that there's no refutation? Well, you'd look at the checks, the captures, and the threats. I call this the CCT formula. So after taking the knight, does black have any checks? Well, not any good ones. He could take the knight, of course, but we can disregard that one because that would just simply lose the queen. He could take this knight, like after this, but actually in that case I would be able to checkmate the black king because there'd still be a pawn on c6. So having done my calculation, I see no reason not to take the knight, so I am going to be material up here. One intermediate move that black could play is rook to d8 now, which would attack my queen. But you know what, I've gained a piece and I'm okay with the possibility of having to deal with some positional problems in order to just take that material. Sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes a piece which is offered cannot be accepted. But here, no. In this case, I could simply take the piece. That's what I've done. And now I've got a big advantage. So now that I've got extra material, the priority is very clear. I need to get my king to safety. The way that I'm going to do that is by castling as quickly as possible. So I can play bishop to d3, for example, and then castle like this. One reason that I play bishop to d3 instead of bishop to e2 is because after bishop to e2 there is still rook to d8, and that would introduce a threat onto the queen where I'd have to put myself into a pin, and I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to instead play bishop to d3. The idea is simply to get castled. I've got the extra knight, and now I just need to play sensibly and look to win with the extra material. Another thing that bishop to d3 does, by the way, as my opponent captures, but if we just go back a move, bishop to d3 also threatens to come into e4. Now if black had played something like knight to f6 there, then that would have been prevented. But instead, black has gone and captured this knight. Now this is a mistake for several reasons. For the first thing, in general, you don't want to trade a bishop for a knight in an open position. I mean, this is clearly an open position. We've got pawns which have been traded in the center, so the position is open, and that makes bishops stronger than knights. The other reason why this move is wrong on principle is because, well, black is down material already, and the more material that's traded, the closer I get to a winning endgame. So this trade I'm very happy to see. By capturing with the queen, I keep my pawn structure intact. I can still castle next move. And I've also got a threat here. The threat is to capture on c6, which would fork the king and the rook. So clearly my position is very good here. What I just need to do is make sure that I don't get into any tactical situations, because with the extra material I should be able to win. The one thing that I need to watch out for is this pin against the knight. So in some future scenario there could be some reason that I need to move that knight, but I can't because it's pinned. That's why I'm going to look to castle as quickly as possible. I mean, black was able to delay that for one move, So back here, right? Black was able to delay me from castling by capturing on f3, so I had to take back, of course. But now after c5, we've seen another mistake. We've seen that my opponent just hasn't noticed that this pawn advance leaves one of his pieces undefended. The piece that's undefended is the rook on a8, and I can simply take that one with check. Now the black king is going to need to move, either to e7 or to d7. Now he chooses e7. It's understandable why. If he'd moved to d7, then I would have been able to take another piece on f8. And I could continue the threats here. A move like knight to d5 check becomes quite tempting. I did say that I was going to castle as quickly as I could. And you know what? Just to keep things simple, that's what I'm going to do. When you're ahead material, you want to prevent your opponent from gaining any counterplay. And by castling my king, there's not going to be any counterplay here for black. This knight is free to move now, and I can keep making threats against the black king on the next move, with my king safely tucked away. Notice how the black queen is very far away from my king now, so I can look to attack without needing to worry about my own king's safety. I can finish my development with something like bishop to e3, or I could play rook to e1, or I could give the check immediately. Lots of good options here, as you'd expect, being a rook and a minor piece up. If we count the material, we can see in the bottom of the screen it's a +7 score. Now that's according to the traditional system of counting pawns as being worth 1, knights and bishops being worth 3, rooks being worth 5, queens being worth 9. So +7 means that effectively I've got an extra rook and a couple of pawns worth of extra material. So knight to f6 makes a lot of sense in a difficult position. What I'm going to do is just pin this knight, because I want to reintroduce the threat of coming into d5. Now, black is going to find it difficult to finish his development because the king is blocking the development of the dark squared bishop. So it's a pretty dire situation here for black, to say the least. I think my opponent could have played this better just by noticing the threats that we saw earlier, right? We had threats such as when I advanced the pawn to d5, that his knight was under attack. You have to notice such things in chess and respond to them. And then advancing this pawn forward, again, that wasn't paying enough attention to what that did. Every pawn move opens a line or a diagonal, and it's worth noticing that the rook was undefended in that position. So my threat now is going to be knight to d5 check, and the knight won't be able to take that because of the pin. In general, when you're attacking, it's good to create things like pins, which make the opponent's position harder to play. So even though this is not a check, it is still making the black king's life less comfortable. So he's attacking this bishop, but I'm going to answer that threat with a check. I don't need to move this bishop out of the way because I can give a check first. So let's do that. The knight can't take, as I said, because the bishop is still pinning. And so the king is going to have to move, as it did, to d7. So now I'm going to have to make a choice as to whether I feel like the bishop or the knight is worth more. If I take with the bishop, then he'll take back, and I can capture with check. That looks very good for me, actually. But let's just check the alternative. If I took here and he takes back, then there's a threat against the black rook, which then probably moves to g8. Also good, and that would also give a possibility of bringing the queen into the d8 square. So the line that I was just calculating there was knight takes, pawn takes, bishop here, rook here, and then queen here. And then the black king is running a bit short on squares, but I do like the ability to continue this with checks. So I'm gonna take this way, he's going to take back, and then I'll take back this way. So we're getting pretty close to checkmate here, I would think. There's not a lot of squares left for the black king. If I were to play queen to d5, then he's actually only got one square. And then I could play queen takes e5, and then he's got just this square, and then I've got queen to e8 checkmate. Let's just calculate that one more time. So queen to d5 check, and then king to e7 is forced. Queen takes e5 check, and then he has to play king to d8, and then I can play queen to e8, which is checkmate. So I'm just going to pre-move all of these, and the black king is going to find itself checkmated. If you'd like my help in improving your chess, then I help adult improvers at the below 2000 ELO level reach their goals in the game. So if you'd like to explore working together, click the link in the description below, and we can see if working together will be a good fit.